We left last week with a description of the rabbis of Spain and Franco-Germany. So I wanted just to point out, before continuing with the history of the period, um, in particularly in the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries, um, to recall the names of some of the great rabbis whose scholarship and books continue to be part of our heritage, that are studied and reflected and commented by students in yeshivot and Talmudic studies to this very day. In the Sephardic world, and these are called the rabbis who are called the Rishonim. As we discussed before, in the rabbis who made the Mishnah or mentioned the Mishnah are called the Tanaim. The rabbis in the Gemara after the Mishnah are called the Amoraim, Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Hanan, Resh Lakish, and so on. And then there are a period of time in Babylonia, from the 6th century to the 10th century, where the rabbis who are managing the community, who are leading the community, and who are the scholars, are the Geonim. These people, the rabbis, did not write necessarily books, although some of them wrote a little more extensively than others, but what they did write was responsa, answering questions to communities far away, from India to Spain and beyond. It is because of that that many of these responsa were found in the Cairo Geniza at the end of the 19th century. But the 10th century on, as we've been discussing last week, we're going to find rabbis who are called the Rishonim. Rabbis who expounded on the Gemara, who describe and analyze the halachic tradition, the legal tradition of our people, incorporating all their knowledge and understanding of the Talmud and beyond, and all the sources. And they, in their commentaries, in their analysis, and their very profound intellectual work, they actually not only established legal principles, which eventually are going to be crystallized in the codes, but also they develop a conceptual analytical method of learning, which to this very day continues to be a part and parcel of Talmudic studies. I just want to mention that although some of this work that they did was ultimately translated into the clear laws that we now have, for example, in the Shulchan Aruch or other codes, beyond that, their intellectual analysis, the depth of thinking and logic, actually develop legal principles, which sometimes are used even to resolve issues which even the Shulchan Aruch did not anticipate. New issues of technology, questions of biotechnology, and other issues that are contemporary. So the solution to these problems is created by or attained by the development of these principles, which these rabbis did. This work of these rabbis, what we call the Rishonim, is from the 11th century to the 15th or 16th century. And the reason that we separate these rabbis from other rabbis is that since these rabbis created the conditions for the Shulchan Aruch, so all the rabbis who lived before the Shulchan Aruch, which is the year 1550, they are called the Rishonim. And all the rabbis who lived who continue to develop and be great authors of Jewish literature after the Shulchan Aruch, after the 16th century, are called the Acharonim. You've heard the expression Rishonim and Acharonim. So Rishonim are these rabbis from the 11th century to the 15th or 16th century. I want to mention some of these names, since I promised you that part of this class is going to be not only about history, but also about the naming of these great personalities that we should know about, and every Jew should be informed. So let me just start with some names, and of course, maybe you have to write it if you want to. The first, as we discussed, one of the students of one of the last Geonim in Babylonia was Rabbi Hananel, who went to the community of Kairouan, modern Tunisia today. And there he developed one of the great yeshivot that produced a lot of rabbis. Many of these rabbis went to various communities in North Africa and Spain. Remember that all of this is in the Muslim aegis and sphere, so they did not go to France or Germany. But these rabbis from the Rabbeinu Hananel moved into various communities. The most prominent of all the students of Rabbeinu Hananel was called the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. So these are the names: Rabbeinu Hananel, the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, of course Maimonides, Rambam, 12th century, Ramban Nachmanides, 13th century, also a commentator of the Bible, Ibn Ezra. And then, of course, other rabbis like we know the Ritva, Rabbi Yom Tov of Seville, Ashvili, the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet from Barcelona, the Ran, Rabbi Nissim from Girona, and later on, Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. These are some of the greater names of the Rishonim that we are familiar with. In the Ashkenazi world, parallel to this situation, we had Rashi, of course, first Rabbeinu Gershom in Metz in Germany, and then Rashi creates this community in Troyes in France, which also establishes students all over France, including Paris. And many of the students of Rashi and the descendants of Rashi, they wrote commentaries on the Talmud, sometimes debating with Rashi himself. And you see that those commentaries, what we call the Tosafot. Tosafot is a collection of commentaries, sometimes projection or arguments about the Talmud against the commentary of Rashi. They debate Rashi's interpretations. One of the most fierce critics of Rashi was none other than his own grandson, Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbeinu Yaakov, who was the son of his daughter. So the Tosafot, Rashi are the major Ashkenazi scholars. The Maharam of Rothenburg, there are others, many of them. Rabbi Shimon de Kusi, who wrote the Baal Lachot Gedolot, one of the first codes in Ashkenazi, also parallel to the Rambam, the code of Jewish law. And finally, the Rosh, the most important rabbi of Germany at this time, Rabbeinu Asher, called the Rosh, 14th century. What is interesting about the Rosh is that expelled from Germany, and as we will discuss in this lecture, we're going to be talking about the end of the Western European Jewry. The end of the German Jewry is epitomized by the Rosh departure from Germany and coming to Spain, to Toledo, where his own son, Rabbeinu Yaakov, becomes the Baal HaTurim. He is the one who writes the first, after the Mishneh Torah, the most organized code of Jewish law, the structure of which and the order of which becomes the basis of the Shulchan Aruch. The Tur and the Shulchan Aruch share the same numeration, the same numbers and chapters and chapters, but the difference is that the Shulchan Aruch is more concise and, of course, incorporates new information and new decisions. But the structure of what each chapter deals with and how it's organized, the Shulchan Aruch is essentially a rehashing of the Tur. In terms of times and dates, the Tur is 14th century in Toledo. The Arba Turim that we heard about, the Tur, and the author is called the Baal HaTurim, or the author of the Tur. That's Rabbi Yaakov, the son of the Rosh. The Shulchan Aruch is a 16th century book, and we will talk about this in the next lecture. So I wanted just to start this lecture by reminding you of these great personalities that lived during this period of time as the Jewish community is going to endure a great deal of upheavals. Let's talk a little bit first about what's happening in Europe in the 12th century. We ended last week talking about Rashi and how Rashi actually experienced the first of the Crusades, 1095. There were 10 Crusades, all in all, organized by the church, in a sense to, some suggested that the purpose of the Crusades was essentially to get money for the church, something that unfortunately, we know that the church has always been interested in getting money. That's one of the reasons they are such a rich organization, so luxurious. And one of the reasons that the reform movement, Reformation, Luther complained about. So, but the ostensible argument is that having the Muslim, having conquered Jerusalem, they were in possession of the Holy Sepulchre, the burial place of their founder Jesus. And so the ostensible reason for the Crusades was to redeem the church of the Holy Sepulchre, which had been built by the mother of Constantine the Great, Helena. There were all in all 10 crusades, starting the year 1095. The last one was 1291. All of them had the same purpose, to go to Israel, redeem, and fight with the Muslims, and take some parts of the land of Israel for the Christianity. But in the process of the Crusades, of course, they were, taking money and from the people that they were defeating all over Europe, and especially, of course, the Jews. To the Jews, unfortunately, the Crusades were a terrible, terrible event. They were massacres in Worms and in German places. And wherever they came, they wanted to convert the Jews to Christianity. And those Jews who refused to convert were killed, burned. Sometimes the Jews themselves, and the Tzafot discusses that in some cases parents kill their own children in anticipation of the massacres, so that they will not be taken by the Christians. Terrible stories. I want to tell you the story of the attack of Jewry and Mainz in Germany in May of 1996. It was written by a Jew who survived. So this is what he writes: "The Jews of the city, knowing of the slaughter of the brethren, fled in hope of safety to the bishop. They put an infinite treasure in his guard and trust, having much faith in his protection. He placed the Jews in a very special hall in his own house, that they might remain safe and secure. But the band held council, and after sunrise, attacked the Jews in the hall with arrows and lances. They killed the Jews, about 700 in number, who in vain resisted the force of an attack of so many thousands. They killed the women also with their sword-pierced, tender children, whatever age and sex." This is how between 30 and 50% of the Jewish community in Europe actually died. Some 10,000 were probably slaughtered by the Crusader mobs. Incidentally, the Crusader, they used to cry, "Hep, hep," something that the Nazis eventually adopted against the Jews. Hep, hep is H-E-P, is initials of the Latin words Hierosolima est perdita. Jerusalem is lost in Latin. That's how they used to attack the Jews. With time, incidentally, this hep hep became hip hip hooray, a cheer that the Jews should never use. So the Crusaders also entered Jerusalem, and in Israel, they embarked on a great building. We know today that many buildings in Israel come from the times of the Crusaders. The structures around the Kotel, for example, date from the time of the Crusades. There were two types of knights, called Knights Templars, which were stationed in a Temple Mountain. That's what they called Templars. They did not destroy the Dome of the Rock, although they destroyed other mosques, because they thought that this was a Temple of Solomon. Then there were other knights, the Knights Hospitallers, who were supposed to provide hospitality to the Christian pilgrims. The reign, by the way, of the Crusaders was short-lived, because in the year 1187, 100 years after the Crusaders started, the Crusaders were conquered by the Sultan Saladin of Egypt, who, in fact, by the way, the family of the Sultan of Saladin of Egypt had a very famous Jewish doctor, Maimonides, in Egypt. So Sultan Saladin defeated the Crusaders, and there he, in a famous battle, the last stronghold of the Crusaders in Israel was in the year 1291 when Akko, another fortress, fell. I want to point out now a little bit about, so this was a terrible story of the end of so many communities, and still Jews remain in Germany and in France. And the Talmudic studies continued, and its academies continued. The Jews were forced to wear a yellow badge. It's interesting, the yellow badge starting in the 13th century by the Fourth Lateran Council of the Christians. And it was instituted by the French as well. I want to tell you, by the way, in France, many of those who were against the Jews, anti-Semites, wanted to blame the Talmud for the Jews. But what if the Jews were doing wrong came from the Talmud? So they started to read the Talmud, and they decided to have a trial of the Talmud to see if the Talmud was really the ignominious text that they saw. In the year 1242, Louis IX of France decides to declare the Talmud guilty. And in front of Notre Dame, all the Talmuds of the area are gathered together, 24 wagon loads of Talmudic handwritten texts were loaded and burned. I must say, by the way, that sadly, the years earlier, some Jewish men and zealots, fanatics, who were opposed to Maimonides in France, rabbis and Jews, some of them the Tosafists, had decided that Maimonides had been writing things which they did not like, that they thought himself was heretical, and they decided to burn some of the books of the Maimonides in France, in Paris. 20 years later, when the Christians decided to burn the Talmud, these rabbis and these Tosafists realized the great error they had committed. And according to the story, 300 rabbis traveled to Israel to go to the burial place of the Rambam of Maimonides to ask for forgiveness for this terrible tragedy. Very important story here. Nicholas Donin was one of the greatest anti-Semites, and he was a Jew who converted to Christianity. We will see this phenomenon of Jews converted to Christianity, and they become the greatest anti-Semites. One of the most important personalities in this time, of course, is the Maharam of Rothenburg, 13th century, and then finally the Rosh, as we discussed, also 13th century, who has to escape to Toledo. So in the 14th century, we see the end of German Jewry. And, we will talk a little bit more about this. So the German Jewry and French Jewry is expelled from Germany and from France in the 14th century. The Jews had also lived in England. They had gone to England even at the time of the Romans. And there, again, the Crusaders come, and there's a famous massacre at the city of York. We are in New York here, the old York, in the year 1190. Finally, the Crusaders the Jews are expelled from England on Tisha B'Av, 1290, July 18, 1290, on the saddest day of the year. The Jews are not permitted into England until Cromwell invites them again in the 17th century. It's interesting, by the way, when Jews are expelled, there's a great benefit to the king. Because what happens? The Jews leave, they leave their property, and all the jewelry and all the goods are taken away from them. So the king, whatever he needed money, would expel Jews, take all their property, accuse them of something, and he would become rich by them. Sadly, this occurred in several places: Germany, Hungary, France. I want to point out in England, we have the first blood libel, first time that somebody suggests that Jews are killing Christian children to extract their blood and use it in the matzah on Pesach. One of the reasons you may recall that in some texts it says that not to use red wine on Pesach because people were afraid that they were accused that they were drinking the blood. So many Ashkenazi communities till this very day only use white wine on Pesach. So the first blood libel occurs in the city of Lincoln, after our own Lincoln. In the city of Lincoln in the year 1255, Jews are accused of crucifying a young boy by the name of Hugh, and they are taken to the Tower of London, and eventually they are killed and expelled, and the properties, of course, go to the king. 16,000 Jews left England. So we see here the Jews of England, the Jews of France, the Jews of Germany, and of course, one of the greatest, saddest event of this time, the 14th century, is the Black Plague, a plague that decimates probably half of all Europe. We are now in the middle of a terrible plague here, nowhere near what the Black Plague was about. The Black Plague devastated Europe, started in the year 1348, and it lasted about 3 years. One of the most characteristic elements of this period, and we're going to see this in Spain as well, and I want to introduce this. For the very beginning of Christianity, the existence of the Jews, the persistent commitment of Jews to our tradition, was a source of great discomfort, anger, and frustration to the Christians. They could not countenance that we were still adhering to our points. And so they always tried to convert us. And for example, in Germany, Strasbourg, in Basel, the entire communities, where they refused to convert to Christianity, they're burned alive, they're killed. On Sunday in Strasbourg, St. Valentine's Day, 2,000 Jews were burned in a cemetery. So this is what's happening all over Europe. But the Jews have left Germany, they have left England, they have left Germany, France, and they're moving east towards Russia, from Poland. We will discuss in the next week, the next class, what happens to these Jews. But let's go back now for a moment to Spain, the site of one of the most important Jewish communities. As we discuss, Spain, due to the great wealth and organization of the Muslims, had been the center of Jewry after the fall of Babylon. The whole Jewry went to Spain. And in Spain, unfortunately, we've encountered the same phenomenon. The Christians are bothered by the fact that there are Jews in the world, and they want to kill us. But in Spain, a new development happens. And that is the concept of people who are converted to Christianity, but somehow they have not completely given up on the Jewish tradition. This is what we call the Marranos. For convenience, or because they have no choice, many of these Jews convert to Christianity, and the Christians are beginning to see that the Jewishness of these conversos is very complex and very troublesome to them. So At first, the church was not too troubled by the problem, assuming that most converts were sincere Christians. But some people, the masses, suspected the Jews were still Jews. Some of them actually may have been. Where? So the Christians did not accept the converts, the conversos. And eventually what happened is that, interestingly enough, the Jews were afraid that they would be killed if they would be converted to Christianity, and then they were suspected of being Jewish. And that's what happened. And it's very interesting, and I want to point out this. The greatest conversos became prominent. I want to emphasize the word prominent Christians. The rabbi of Burgos, Solomon Halevi, became bishop of the city, Burgos, under the baptismal name of Pablo de Santa Maria. And he was, in fact, famous for his anti-converso attitudes. He was leading the pack against the so-called converso Jews. Bartolomeo Carranza became Archbishop of Toledo, who became also then primate of all Spain, all Jews. Hernando de Talavera, who became Archbishop of Granada. And here, by the way, one of the fascinating things, you all know about the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus created by St. Ignatius of Loyola. The successor of St. Ignatius was none other than a Jew, a converso, Diego Lainez. The patron saint of Spain, Teresa de Avila, is of converso descent. And some suggest that even a Fernando the King and Isabella were of some Jewish concern as well. But of course, the most awful of all of these actions was a Jew, converso, of converso origin. His mother was a Jew who converted to Christianity, was none other than Tomás de Torquemada, a Spanish Dominican monk who was a fanatic anti-Semite, anti-Jewish. It may be that the more he suspected that he may have been Jewish, the more he hated the Jews. And he demanded and created the tribunal of the Inquisition. Now, until now, we've had just mobs, a little bit like we're experiencing here in America, riots. Come, let's kill the Jews. And they would come to, especially one of the greatest riots happened in Barcelona in 1391, which is one of the most paradigmatic events in Spain. But the Inquisition actually created a process by which people will be, informers will tell that this man is not eating pig, or this person don't use fire on Shabbat. There is an interesting passage in Don Quixote, when he talks about the Saturdays of Sábados de Lágrimas, the Saturdays of tears. It probably refers to the fact that Jews and Saturday were tortured because they were investigated and checked and so on. So the Inquisition is a process by which the tribunal will take and accuse and bring to death any Jew suspected, any converso suspected of being a Judaizer. And the Inquisition actually continues until 1834, in South America. Lima, especially, and Mexico, had people who were killed by the Inquisition. I want to tell you an interesting story. I want to point out as we mentioned already, some of the archbishops and even the saint of Spain, Teresa de Avila, being of Jewish convert. And this, by the way, illustrates an important general element. the Spanish society is fused with Jewish blood. I mean, you could see the names like Nunes today or Talavera. I want to point out interesting that one of the um, the supporter of Columbus, the family of Santangel, Luis de Santangel, was also actually at one point considered to be a Judaizer, and the family was killed. I want to tell you an interesting story. In the city of Seville, the Jews were very important. The conversos, rather, were not only powerful, rich merchants, they're also part of the government. They played important part in every aspect of local life. So the lead among the Jews was in Seville, somebody by the name of Diego de Susan, an immensely wealthy new Christian merchant. So he, with other influential merchants and members of the town council, conspired against the Inquisition. When the Inquisition would come to arrest some of them, they were going to kill them and attack them and so on. And so they said, we will set the city in a turmoil with our followers and friends and so on. So the conspiracy took place and they were going to defend themselves. Diego de Susan had a daughter nicknamed La Susana, whose surprising beauty had earned her the name of La Hermosa Hembra. She was carrying on an intrigue with a Christian caballero, to whom in a moment of weakness, she disclosed the secret of the conspiracy. Unfortunately, this was he told the inquisitors, and this was the greatest pleasure for them. Because all of the Judaizers, all the conversos were arrested at the same time, and they were taken to an act of faith. In 1481, they were burned alive. I don't want to tell the story that La Hermosa Hembra, this beautiful girl left destitute, was befriended. They wanted her to be admitted to a convent. Eventually, she left the convent and adopted a life of shame and died in great poverty. She said that her skull should be placed as a warning over the door of her house. And it was left in Seville, called the Calle de la Muerte, Street of the Death. And it remained until the building was pulled down in the renovations only in the 19th century. And I think the message was that, and this is the message that many conversos had, the more they attacked them, the more they wanted to be part of the Jewish. They went back to the roots. I want to point out a beautiful comment. That in fact, as they were persecuted, the Jews wanted to go back to the roots, and this in itself is a fascinating example. So the horror of this Inquisition is that the converso population went back to their Jewish roots. So now what the Christians said was a crime, they now consider it to be a source of honor and pride. And this is what many of the Marrano community is going to be suffering. I want to talk about that. All of this Inquisition ended at the beginning. Isabella, particularly, and Ferdinando de Aragon tried to protect the Jews. In fact, they even wrote, they're my servants, they're my subjects. You're not allowed to touch them. But eventually, Torquemada was able to persuade Isabella. But the problem of the Judaizers was very serious. And then she started to see how many former Jews, were in her own court. And she realized how many Jews there were in her own place. And of course, the most important was the treasurer of the kingdom, Don Isaac Abarbanel, the famous physician, philosopher, and writer Abarbanel, who lived in the year 1437 to 1508. He tried to stop the famous edict of expulsion. Isabella is convinced by Torquemada that the Jews it's not enough, the Inquisition is not enough. We can't just get rid of, we have to get rid of all the Jews, throw them all out. Either they convert en masse or they have to leave the country. And for March 30, 1492, the edict of expulsion takes place. 200,000 Jews are expelled. The edict was going to take place on July 31st. At that time, they had to leave. And in these few months, they had to sell all their property. Torquemada extended it by 2 more days till August 2nd, 1492. That day was Tisha B'Av. It's interesting that Columbus sailed from America August 3rd, 1492. As we discussed before, Columbus himself may have been of Jewish origin, and he was certainly financed by many Jews. He was born in Genoa, but he's in Italy, but his first language was Castilian, and he certainly enjoyed not only the financiers of voyage, but 2 important Jews, Luis de Santangel and Gabriel Sanchez, both Jewish converts. But the maps, navigational instruments, like the quadrant, were all created by Jews, and especially a scholar by the name of Abraham Zacuto, who had created the astrolabe, a kind of navigational instrument that was used also by other explorers like Vasco da Gama. And it's clear that the Columbus had a lot of Jewish connection. His most important assistant was Luis de Torres, who also had converted to Christianity the day before departure. And he was important because he was able to speak 12 languages. And one of the reasons he took them is Columbus hoped that they were going to find in the New World, or somewhere in India, whatever they were going, rather, they were going to find the 10 lost tribes. And that's what they took him with him. And so with the departure of Columbus as a symbol, we see here the ending of the Spanish Jewry. So many hundreds of thousands of people decided to leave their homes, sell property at a cheap, abandon all their fields and all their possessions, and not convert to Judaism, not to convert to Christianity, is a testament of the greatness and the faithfulness of the Jewish people. Where these people went and what their story is going to be the subject of the next lecture, which will be entitled After 1492. So now I want to end with this thought. So in the previous lecture, we saw how the Jewry from Babylon and Israel were moving westward towards North Africa, Spain, Germany, and France, Western Europe. And they created there, in 4th centuries, some magnificent communities, authors, books, scholarship, great creation. But through the unfortunate fanaticism and hatred that the Christians had towards the Jews, these communities ultimately had to end. And Western Europe does not have any more Jews after 1492. And the Jewry now, just like we move westward in the 10th century, now we go back east by the, accepted by for example, 15 the 1500s, the king of Poland invites the Jews and protects them. The Jews go to Poland, they go to Russia, or parts of Russia, and also to Hungary and the East. The Sephardic Jews in the Muslim world move towards Israel, Syria, Greece, Italy, Greece, North Africa, and most importantly, Asia Minor, Turkey. But Turkish Jewry is going to become a very important part of this world. So after 1492, we're going to see two centers: Poland for the Ashkenazi world, and Israel and Turkey particularly Izmir in the Sephardic world, which is interesting, by the way, that you will see a lot of connections between Izmir and Krakow in the 16th century. But that will be the lecture for the next time. With this, we end the end of European Jewry up to 1492.